Chair of the Planning Commission. So I will go through these kind of rules and regulations about running the meeting, and then Steinberger is here. So welcome to the March 10th, 2025 Site Plan Review Committee Subcommittee meeting for 2500 Wilson project. We will be holding a hybrid public meeting which enables remote electronic participation as legally authorized by the Code of Virginia per the Planning Commission's electronic meeting policy adopted July 7, 2022. Members of the SPRC subgroup for the 2500 Wilson project are participating both here in person and virtually through electronic means. At this time, I'd like to orient everyone to our hybrid environment and cover a few specifics about how tonight's meeting will run. Members of the public may attend the meeting here in person or electronically using the Microsoft Teams link provided on the SPRC webpage, the project webpage, the county's events calendar, and the email notification sent to SPRC email subscribers. Additionally, there is a dial-in phone option for those who wish to use it. For our subgroup members joining virtually, if anyone loses internet connectivity during tonight's meeting, please reconnect with us by phone. Please keep your phones muted and devices muted until you are called upon. Turn off sound to any other devices around you to minimize interference. For our virtual attendees using Microsoft Teams, please turn off your video feed. I will address when it is appropriate to turn on in a moment. The Microsoft Teams meeting chat is active to serve two purposes: for SPRC subgroup members who need technical assistance, and for members of the public to add their names to the list for public comment, which will be taken at the end of the meeting. Teams chat should not be used for discussion. Those who are planning to provide public comment will still need to do so at the end of the meeting, as the chat will not serve as that opportunity. All public comments must be shared verbally for the record during the assigned public comment period. If subgroup members participating virtually wish to be recognized to speak on an item during the course of the meeting, turn your video feed on and raise your virtual hand in Teams. Commissioner Steinberger will monitor the video feeds that are on as an indicator of who would like to speak. If subgroup members are participating via phone today without the video option, please announce your name and group you are representing now, and I will verbally check in to see if you wish to be recognized, as you do not have the video feed option. Do we have anybody calling in by phone? Okay. For our members of the public who would like to provide feedback and comment, you will be called on to speak at the end of the meeting and will be allotted 2 to 3 minutes to speak on tonight's agenda items. Speaking time allotted will depend on the number of speakers we have this evening. If you wish to speak, please enter your name in the meeting chat for virtual attendees, or provide staff with your name if in person, and you will be added to the speakers list. Lastly, this is a public forum meeting. Today's meeting will be recorded and posted to the county website. All information associated with today's meeting, whether written or spoken, is subject to the Freedom of Information Act requirements. So, is anybody sitting on the side a member of the SPRC? There you go.
I'm not sure whether I'm a member, but I'm here representing Line Village. John Carton is also calling in.
Okay.
Not sure whether he was on. I just got a text message.
Okay. Is Jason Harrier is joining, or you're?
I don't think so. I don't see. He's not here. I don't think Jason generally comes to these meetings.
Okay, so he's listed as the roster. Is he the president of the?
He's the president.
Okay, so if you can ask him to email Commissioner Steinberger, just saying that you're going to be representing for the roster, then we can update that. Okay. But everyone else sitting on the side is not an official member. Okay, so Commissioner Steinberger, like I said, will be here momentarily. Why don't we start off by going around the room and doing introduction? I'm Tenley Peterson. I'm chair of the Planning Commission and one of the members of this SPRC.
I'm Bryce Johnson. I'm a principal planner with the Department of Environmental Services for this project.
I'm Daniel Garay. I'm a member of the Park and Recreation Commission, and I'm part of
my name's Dan Glavin. I work with on the development team and represent the owner.
Hi, I'm Kendrick Whitmore. I'm a land use and zoning attorney with
Chris Kreider, Urban Design Section with Planning Department.
It's Bill Gerhardt representing Line Village.
Sandy Parker, Arlington Commission for the Arts.
David Howell, Forestry and Natural.
Jim Lantelli, Planning Commission.
Trevor Montano, Commissioner on C2E2.
Hima Hakura, representative from Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association.
Hugh Robertson, Planning Commission.
Amber Punkage representing Pedestrian Advisory.
And I'm Emma Martin, and I am the principal planner for the planning division working on this project. Now our chair has joined us.
Thank you. Do you already do virtual?
No, we have not yet.
Okay, so I'm 10 late. No, just kidding. I'm Sarah Steinberg. Apologies for being a few minutes late, toddler. Let's do the virtual participant. If you know, members of the SPRC. We'll reserve time at the end for public comment. But if you are a member of the SPRC joining us virtually, please take this time to do so. Or if you're not a member of the SPRC joining us virtually, then don't say anything and we'll move forward.
Do you have Eric Goodman?
Okay. Sure. Eric, I believe you can introduce yourself now.
I'm Eric Goodman. I'm not the main representative in this case. Ambar is. I'm just listening in.
Thank you. We appreciate the clarification. Okay, so just not Eric. Got it. Thank you. You already presented the agenda? Oh, is anyone else who is a member of this SPRC joining us around the room? Or just here for public comment or participation?
Part of the applicant team.
Part of the applicant team?
National Fees Architecture.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I'd like to point
Okay.
out, we have a very young citizen here who
Yes.
is interested in future planning commission activities, as well as her books.
Very nice. Did you come together? Yes, okay. You drove, right? Okay. Keep your mother honest. Okay. Hi, so for tonight's agenda, did you already present? Okay. So for the agenda this evening, this is meeting 1 of the SPRC process for 2500 Wilson Boulevard. We've already had the online engagement for the for this project, and I believe we're going to start with a presentation from the applicant or from staff. Staff. We will start with a presentation from staff.
Excuse me, could I just ask?
Yes.
I'm from across the street, but I'm probably not staying more than about 30 minutes.
Okay.
So, could you ask everyone to try to speak loudly and clearly as they're going around and the applicant, because the recording for 3033 online was pretty hard.
Oh, it was hard to hear that one. Okay.
So, they post a recording, but it would be helpful if people remembered that their voices.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, that's a good reminder. This is a hybrid environment where we will have people, most of it, folks that appear to be participating in the room, but we do have folks online. So we'll make sure there are audio recording rather, devices around the room. So, please do speak up, enunciate. And as a reminder, this is being recorded and people will watch it later. So thank you. Good reminder. I think with that, we will turn to staff for a presentation.
So
You're ready.
Welcome to the first SPRC meeting for the 2500 Wilson Boulevard Major Site Plan Amendment. My name is Emma Martin, and I'll cover the staff presentation. In this presentation, I'll provide a brief overview and discuss the following topics. Then I'll go into process and next steps. Tonight, we'll be talking about land use and density, site design and layout, building height, and building form and architecture. The 1.42 acre site is located at 2500 Wilson Boulevard in the Clarendon Courthouse neighborhood. For context, in 1984, site plan number 220 was approved for a 5-story office building with ground floor commercial retail space, which is the building that exists today. The site's bordered by Wilson Boulevard to the north, North Barton Street to the east, Clarendon Boulevard to the south, and North Cleveland Street to the west. To the north, commercial uses are located along Wilson Boulevard, and single-family residential uses are behind in the Lion Village neighborhood. The existing zoning is CO 1.5 mixed use with a low office apartment hotel GLUP designation. The applicant is seeking a rezoning to the CO 2.5 mixed use zoning district. The site is currently designated low office apartment hotel. Concurrent with this major site plan amendment, the applicant is requesting a GLUP amendment to change the site to medium office apartment hotel, which would support the requested zoning district of CO 2.5. Per the applicable GLUP guidance for the site, medium office apartment hotel could be an appropriate GLUP designation for this site. While there's little specific guidance in the courthouse sector plan for this site, the courthouse sector plan addendum calls for higher density commercial residential mixed use for this area, but does not specify a particular GLUP or zoning designation. On the subject site, the courthouse sector plan addendum urban design analysis identifies a sculpture or other feature, and the sector plan's concept plan identifies public space, plaza, and enhanced landscaping on the southern portion of the site. General guidance in the illustrative plan and design guidelines chapter of the courthouse sector plan includes creating sensitive transitions, breaking up the building mass using setbacks and variable roof heights, differentiating between the pedestrian ground level and upper floors, and supporting the pedestrian environment, as well as breaking up horizontal facades. In June 2022, TMG 2500 Wilson Boulevard LLC applied for a GLUP amendment to change the GLUP designation from low office apartment hotel to medium office apartment hotel with an associated rezoning to CO 2.5. As the site in question has little specific guidance in the courthouse sector plan, staff initiated a special GLUP study which evaluates the appropriateness of the requested GLUP amendment and provides additional guidance for potential future redevelopment. For this GLUP study, an interdepartmental staff team initiated a public review process in conjunction with the Long Range Planning Committee of the Planning Commission, which consisted of representatives from the Clarendon Courthouse Civic Association, Lyon Village Civic Association, as well as the Park and Recreation Commission. Community input gathered throughout the public review process, which included one LRPC meeting, informed the 2500 Wilson's special GLUP study document. The study document summarizes staff's analysis and recommendations for potential future redevelopment. The consensus was that given the guidance for the site outlined in the recently completed Courthouse West special GLUP study document, there was no need to complete a Tier 2 review, and that the Courthouse West study document can further inform analysis of the 2500 Wilson block. In May 2023, the 2500 Wilson GLUP study was accepted by the county board, along with the adoption of an RTA to future public hearings to consider a GLUP amendment from low to medium office apartment hotel. The 2500 Wilson special GLUP study document summarizes staff's analysis and outlines recommendations for building design, including guidance on setbacks, height, and tapering based on the Courthouse West special GLUP study guidance. In order to ensure that any future building on this site respects the context, the recommended approach to building step back and tapering that was integral to the Courthouse West special GLUP study is also generally applicable here. Now we'll get into the proposal. This proposal includes 296 units at a density of around 208 units per acre with a mix of different unit types, including studio, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. This includes around 93 units per acre of additional density, which is permitted through the provision of features and amenities that benefit the community. Mixed-use residential and commercial uses are in conformance with the courthouse sector plan guidance and GLUP study guidance for this site. In terms of site design and layout, the mixed-use building is 14 stories with ground floor residential and retail, which is in conformance with the Courthouse West special GLUP study guidance to activate the ground floor. The retail areas will have entries along Wilson Boulevard and Clarendon Boulevard, while the main residential lobby entrance will front on North Barton Street. Above the one-story podium, the applicant proposes a courtyard and amenities for the building's residents. Additionally, the building is topped with a private rooftop amenity space. The below-grade parking garage and the location of access to parking off North Cleveland Street is in conformance with the GLUP study's recommendation. For purpose of tonight's discussion, we can talk about the building and open space at a conceptual level in terms of placement and layout. But as the applicant progresses on the design of these spaces, we can go into specifics at the next SPRC meeting, which will cover transportation, public art, and open space. In conformance with the sector plan and GLUP study guidance, the applicant's proposing approximately 6,700 square feet of open space on the southern portion of the site, which will include pavers, planters, seating, and new trees along the sidewalk. The applicant submitted plans do show outdoor dining. However, that's a separate process from this site plan and not a part of this site plan proposal. The applicant's aware that the streetscape and park frontages should be designed to support a variety of uses, not just restaurants. The applicant's original request was a 16-story building with over 320 units. On February 19th, the applicant submitted a revised application to change the building height to 14 stories, which conforms with the recommended maximum height outlined in the 2 applicable GLUP studies guidance. The proposed building height of the building from average site elevation is 394 feet and 408 feet, including the 14-foot mechanical penthouse. So the building will have a height of up to 171.5 feet at its highest point from the ground. Setbacks will vary depending on location, with approximately 4 to 15 feet on Wilson Boulevard, and on Clarendon Boulevard, setbacks range from 22 to 68 feet. The use of variable setbacks on Wilson and Clarendon is in conformance with the Glove Study and sector plan guidance. The project is generally in conformance with the Glove Study's guidance in terms of setbacks, which are provided Wilson, see them here on the slide, on the second, fourth, and 13th floor, 14th and 13th floors, and Boulevard on the second, fourth, 13th, and 14th floors, as well as North Barton Street on the second, fourth, and 13th. However, there are no setbacks on the North Cleveland Street frontage and no variable setbacks on North Cleveland or North Barton Street, which deviates from the Glove's guidance. Staff is going to continue to work with the applicant on addressing these deviations. With the exception of North Cleveland Street, the applicant has used setbacks to break up the building's mass, has tapered the height down to 2 to 4 stories along Clarendon Boulevard and 2 to 4 stories along Wilson Boulevard, and has used changing and massing and fenestration to distinguish between a building top, middle, and base, all of which are in conformance with the Glove Study's guidance and sector plan's guidance. The proposed building form and architecture is in conformance with many of the recommendations in the Courthouse West Special Glove Study, including in terms of maximum height, breaking up the building facade to generate this visual interest, transitioning height down towards the public space, utilizing multiple stepbacks. However, as I mentioned, the proposed building deviates from the Glove Study guidance in terms of stepbacks and setbacks on North Cleveland Street, which I'll go more into on the next slide. In addition, use of lightly colored brick on a majority of the facade deviates from the Glove Study's guidance of using a variety of materials. However, the applicant has used changes in massing and fenestration to distinguish a difference between the top, middle, and base of the building, which is in conformance with the Glove's recommendation. So this shows the North Cleveland Street frontage. The Glove guidance states that along North Cleveland Street, building heights of 4 to 6 stories could be appropriate. However, no step back is provided here. The applicant has not provided justification for this deviation, but as I mentioned, staff is going to continue to work with the applicant on this deviation, as right now it is not pedestrian scaled, and the scale is perceived at 14 stories due to the absence of a setback. This lack of setbacks on North Cleveland Street should not have an impact of shadowing on the open space, however. So we'll continue to work with the applicant on that, as well as the treatment of the loading and parking garage doors, which you can see here. We would prefer to see something more transparent in this area. Staff hosted an online engagement opportunity, which garnered 153 participants and 593 comments. Both staff and the applicant have reviewed these responses, in which many feel the retail and residential uses are appropriate and an improvement over the existing uses. However, some wondered if any existing structure could be retained. Many expressed strong opposition to the level of increased density at this location, which at the time was 16 stories during online engagement, as they believe it will overwhelm the community and will negatively impact the character of the neighborhood and local infrastructure, including streets, existing parking, schools, and sewers. At the same time, many expressed support for the proposed density of 16 stories, as they feel housing is much needed in this area, and some feel it could accommodate even more density than proposed, due to the close proximity to metro, transit options, and walkability of the area. A summary of these responses has been posted on the webpage and goes more into depth in each topic area. We also conducted our typical community outreach to relevant groups and promotion methods through the county channels. Tonight's SPRC will be followed by a second SPRC meeting in the coming months, which will cover topics on the slide. I already mentioned them: open space, landscaping, transportation, parking. So the public review process will then move towards commission and county board meetings this summer. This concludes my presentation. Next, we'll have the applicant present briefly. They will.
Okay. Applicant, when you're ready.
There we go. Great. Well, thank you all. Appreciate your presentation from Ms. Martin, and sure why we've got that up there, but there we go. That's better. Dan Glavin from TMG is going to give the first part of the presentation, and then Ashton Allen from Studios. Take it away, Dan.
Thank you. Scott, next slide, please. So as we know from Emma's presentation that she just gave, this building is located in the courthouse neighborhood of the RB corridor. I'm not going to dwell on the existing conditions, but I think it's relevant for how we thought about the site design, layout, density, and all that good stuff. Next slide, Scott. The site is currently improved with about 100,000 square foot office building. We're directly in between both the Clarendon and Courthouse metros. We have some open space that is a key part of our redevelopment proposal that will be a focus in our second SPRC hearing, but is worth noting as we think about the design itself today as well. Next slide, Scott. And I think as we thought about the proposed design of this development, we spent a lot of time thinking about what exists there today and what opportunities there are for improvement. Specifically, as you go around the building, we have some open space that's located on Clarendon Boulevard and is currently elevated from the sidewalk. It feels very private, although it is technically publicly accessible. It really just feels like green space that's there for the office tenants. And keep in mind, this is a 50% occupied office building. So there aren't a lot of tenants there to take advantage of that space to begin with. But as we think about what could exist there from a residential standpoint, we wanted to think about replacing and enhancing that open space in a way that it can be a true gathering space for the community. And that has a direct impact on how we thought about laying out the building and the density that can be located there today. Next slide. These are just a few images of the existing conditions as well. I think it's probably more relevant for our second SPRC hearing to talk about public art as well, but that's something that we continue to study actively. We took that away as a key priority among other things from our community engagement process. How do we reincorporate that how do we reincorporate the public art in some way into the proposed open space? And so that you'll notice as we go through this presentation, that'll be a part of the thought process. Next slide. So one thing that came out of the community engagement process as well, and this was really a personal goal of mine going into the rezoning, I think it's possible and or common in a rezoning or entitlements process for it to feel somewhat adversarial. It's kind of us versus them, whether it's the applicant and the community or the applicant and the county. I think this has been a collaborative process to date, and it's something that we're really excited about. I know we still have a long ways to go in terms of getting to the approval, but I think we're excited about the building that we're proposing today. We started off thinking about the planning efforts that have happened to date. And specifically, we requested a GLUP study thinking that this is the place where density makes sense. And so we were thinking about it in terms of the zoning districts where density could be maximized and therefore kind of guided ourselves towards the CO zoning district. From there, as Emma outlined, we revised our GLUP study application to accommodate the CO 2.5 zoning district, which is limited in terms of density on from a units per acre constraint. And then we ultimately submitted a building that was 16 stories in height, so the maximum allowed under the CO 2.5 zoning district. I think we heard the county, we heard the community loud and clear that height was a concern here. And so we've revised our application to incorporate a 14-story maximum height. And I think that's one of the main benefits of having a collaborative process like this. Next slide, Scott. So one thing as we thought about the site layout, I know, again, a comment that came throughout the community engagement process was, can you reincorporate any aspect of the existing office development? The existing office basically covers the northern half of the site. The below grade, partially below grade parking garage covers the southern half of the site. So we studied it pretty closely, and ultimately we're not able to incorporate any elements of the existing office building. But what we were able to do was create a building that activates most, if not all, of this 4 sides of this block. It's relatively unique that we have a full block development. And so we prioritized retail along the open space because we think of those uses as complementary. The last thing we want, and I think the county and the community would agree, is to deliver a bunch of open space, have it sit vacant. So the fact that we've located that along the open space along Clarendon Boulevard, we think is a use that will complement each other. We've also activated North Barton Street by locating our residential entry off of that street. We have corner retail located along Wilson and Barton, as well as some ground floor residential units on Wilson Boulevard that we believe serve as a retail equivalent and will activate the street in a way that otherwise might not happen. I skipped over at a high level. We're proposing a 296 unit multifamily building. We talked about up to 14 stories in max height. We have 3 levels of below grade parking, which we acknowledge is above the guidelines for minimum parking ratios here. But we feel it's appropriate for the target demographic that we're thinking about in this location, and happy to speak to that in more detail. But I think without further ado, I'm going to flip it over to our teammate and architect to talk about the building.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ashton, Alpha Studios Architecture. What you can see here on the board is basically a diagram that's cutting through Clarendon Boulevard at the left and Wilson Boulevard at the right, kind of cutting north-south through the site, kind of looking through a fat portion of the building. But what you really start to see is something that from the GLUP guidelines and early conversations with the county and the community, finding opportunities to really set the building back where there are approaches, where we're going westbound on Wilson or eastbound on Clarendon. If you go to the next one, Scott. So as we looked at massing and starting with a donut on the site in this kind of interesting parallelogram that is the corridor between Wilson and Clarendon Boulevard, knowing that we really wanted to incorporate an open space to the south on that first carving for open space, which removed a portion of that available mass. Then we really wanted to prioritize opening up the view as you're traveling up Wilson Boulevard. The other advantage of that, as we started pushing and terracing the building back in that zone, is that we were pulling the building mass away from where cast shadows on Lion Village. If you look at how the roads kind of curve up to the north, we were playing constantly with pulling the building such that our shadows at seasons, even in the winter, weren't going to get any shadows into a backyard at 16 stories, and now are pulled back into the street for 14 stories. And then that final piece is after we've kind of twisted that mass, is really looking at stepping up to create a variation in elevation and scale of pedestrian frontage. So if we go to the next slide, you start to see how those moves kind of start to reflect in a building architecture that looks somewhat remarkable for the corridor, but is actually just responding to these key elements within the GLUP study. So the next slide zooms in on the corner that's in front of us, which is the This slide articulates some of the architectural notions of base, middle, and top. And I know one of the comments on the GLUP recommendations of varying materials we'll talk about in a minute, but we've looked to incorporate various articulations of a similar material to be able to have that variety architecturally within kind of a unified vocabulary, but a clear articulation of base, middle, and top with, frankly, a lot of terracing for pretty efficient residential. The next one. This zooms in now on that corner of Wilson and Barton. So to the left of the screen is Barton. You can see a little bit of kind of orange zone that is the residential lobby to the left. And then down to the right, after this retail corner with some residential above it, there's residential active streetscape along the Wilson frontage. And you can start to see here these kind of dark shadow lines is an articulation of brick that's different from a more conventional articulation. So even within the same material, you're getting a variation in texture that's creating, it's kind of like a rusticated base in a classical building, like neoclassical right now. The next one. We're going to move around the block. So now we've traveled down Barton Street. Barton Street is on the right side of the image where the car traveling away from us. And Clarendon is kind of traveling at the front. So On the left side of the image is where there is open space down below that Dan talked about, where we've really worked hard to remove the partially below grade parking garage today, so we can drop that platform to the level of the sidewalk to be able to have people actually flow in and out of the park. Right now, there's kind of a knee wall that you can't get over. And then the similar articulation on the opposite corner of the Wilson and Barton, you're starting to see on Cleveland and Clarendon with this 3-story mass that does set back a little bit on Cleveland. Jump to the next one. So here's a view that's starting to look up Cleveland. That same mass that you're seeing at the front, the bottom 3 stories, does have a 6-foot setback at the 4th floor here and at the 2nd floor up on Wilson as those architecture step back. So it's certainly not the level of setbacks that you see on the other facades, but almost because the other facades set back in such a dramatic way, the setbacks here, which is probably what you get from most applicants, you barely see it. So we're proud of it, but easy to miss. So absolutely. And if you jump to the next image, something that we're really excited about is the kind of articulation of materials, as I mentioned before. So the middle image on the top is starting to show a real photograph of how the different articulation of brick in the same material can have a really different feel, the same way that a stone rusticated base would. And I think part of an explanation for the general palette is that the architecture is set up to be a base to the biophilic additions from landscape and the terracing. So as you start to see some of that, which we'll talk more about in the second SPRC, once you add that level of materiality onto this, the base image, I think you see a really rich and exciting architecture, which by itself, it's pretty simple. The next image, I think we're really excited. Sorry, these are the elevations. And just to walk around the building, we have these for reference as we want to talk through. I think the staff presentation did a great job articulating the notions. And then finally, I think, yes, want to leave you with this image again, kind of whetting an appetite for the next SPRC about the opportunities to activate the open space. So we're looking east on Clarendon, that kind of directly up the street, and you'll see kind of to the right side this active space that's brought down to grade with the sidewalk, so that this can really be an open space that's activated by the retail uses and activated by the street and circulation. So with that, I think
there are just 2 notes on this rendering that I want to highlight. It does not currently show the public art that could be reincorporated into the open space. So that's something that we continue to study. The other is we received a comment earlier on in the process from staff regarding having larger canopy or tree canopy in this park. So we're specifically still working on that aspect. We do plan to include some larger canopy trees in the open space, but this rendering does not currently reflect that.
And the 2 stories.
that's correct. That's actually now 3 stories. This rendering has not been fully edited from our quick change of height.
Yes.
I will make the request that for the second SPRC, we get a rendering that does all the things you just
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think this rendering, very pretty.
We'll come back.
Yeah, it seems to create, it is not conveying what is currently now on the table. So, okay. Was that the presentation?
That's
Okay, great, thank you,
Yeah.
sorry. That was me talking, so I got confused. Great, well, thank you to staff and thank you to applicants for the presentation. For doing those both on a time-aware basis, I always appreciate that. So as a reminder, the topics for tonight are land use and density, site design and layout, building height, building form and architecture. Where I want to start is with if anyone has clarifying questions first before we get into those topics. Those would be things like, was that 3 stories or 4? Or as we just saw in that rendering, hey, shouldn't that be 3 stories, not 2? That would be a clarifying question, so good job. Anyone with clarifying questions before we go into the first topic? Yeah.
That 3rd story, are you planning on having it retail or What are you, because I noticed that you increased it from 2 to 3. What are you thinking for that?
The third and fourth stories or anything above the first story will be residential.
So even though it's part of the part that's jutting out, it would be residential to the street.
That's correct.
Clarifying question on the clarifying question. Does residential, does that mean necessarily a living unit, or could that be like amenity space for residents?
It could be amenity space. The only second level amenity space is located kind of along Wilson Boulevard.
Okay.
So I think the space that you're referring to is residential.
Correct. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, clarifying question.
Clarify, yeah, just, could you just describe a little bit more the current parking garage and what you plan to do to remove it and then fill it and then adapt it to the layout that you would like to
Sure.
create?
Scott, would you mind
trying to
sharing?
picture what's under there
Mhm.
in the final scenario, you know?
Yes. Scott, could you flip to the appendix slide that has the existing site layout?
I'll just remind people to speak up so that the recording captures everyone's voices. It's a little harder to hear some people back here.
So this is the existing office layout. What's shaded in blue is the office building that is 5 stories in height. The below grade or partially below grade parking garage is shaded in this light pink color. So when I referenced earlier that it covers the southern half of the site, this is what I meant by that. Scott, it might actually be helpful now to flip to one of our parking levels or the ground floor plan of our proposed design. And while he does that, the thought behind what we did here was we first studied whether we could reuse any amount of the existing parking garage. Because of where it's located on the site, we really weren't able to do that. We may save in some excavation to your point, but there's not necessarily an opportunity for us to reuse the existing parking garage given the layout that we've proposed, which for the dimensions of the site is very efficient.
So the portion between the building and the perimeter is going to be filled.
That will be filled with the open space above it.
The rest of my questions about that, I'll wait till the next session.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, clarifying question.
The terrace on Wilson, is that going to be like an amenity space, a social place, a green terrace, gardens? It looks like there's a lot of biophilia there.
Sure. Yeah, along Wilson Boulevard is mainly green roof, non-occupiable space. There are some units that will have access to small private terraces, but there isn't either public space or space for the community that lives in this building at large.
Will the private terraces be on that terrace, like part of it, or
You wouldn't actually be able
can't
to
see them
see
from
them from the road.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay,
they're more or less balcony sized.
got it. Okay.
Now, on the Cleveland Street side, there is a U, and you have the two stories of retail at the bottom. What's on top of that, within that U, which is higher above, is that going to be like garden areas for the building? Or, I mean, like right now, it's not publicly accessible area. It looks like it's a private area, but.
Do you mean along Clarendon?
Yeah, sorry, I'm clowning.
Yes. That is a private amenity space for the residents that live in the building.
So it's like a pool area or something like that?
We envision having the pool on the rooftop space. So that's a sitting and gathering area. There may be grills in that location, for example. Yeah.
Any other clarifying questions?
One down.
Oh, yes.
On the parking garage, I'm just trying to get a feel for what's actually underneath the plaza. And would it make more sense to have the building come into the plaza area a little bit more as a way of reducing the height and perhaps enhancing the taper, particularly side that I assume from the.
So the first part of your question is clarifying. The second part of your question goes into building form and architecture, which lucky for you is on the agenda tonight.
Okay.
So I don't know if it makes sense to hold both parts of that to that topic, or if you, yes, I'm being told, yes, it does. Okay, so we will cover that on that agenda item.
Another question is going to be on I assume the main entrance of the building is going to be on, not on the Cleveland side, but on the other side? Park. Okay, and that's going to be a two-way street, or currently probably is, and I'm thinking about pizza delivery guys, and I mean, clearly the Wilson and Clarendon sides are not good places for dropping people off because you're on the left side of the street. The Metro, have you checked with Metro in terms of how far you can build towards Metro? Because sometimes in the past, Metro has cut back on a building garage after things were approved.
Yes, I can answer your first and then second question. So for our main residential entry off of Barton, we do have some parallel parking spaces located on Barton as well, but we've specifically reserved 2 pickup and drop-off spaces, either for delivery personnel or Ubers and Lyft rideshare. So they'll be out of the right of way, which we view as a positive. And in terms of WMATA coordination, specifically through our geotechnical engineer, we have started to reach out to them. So they've seen a preliminary layout of the site, and we'll continue to communicate with them throughout the process.
Great. Just as a reminder, transportation is a topic for the second SPRC. We'll leave it there. I'm going to move us to land use and density. So for folks who are, interested in kind of, the height change, I think we can, talk a bit to that, the reduced, footprint. That would be, if anyone had feedback on that, that's another topic that's appropriate at this time. Anything on that topic? Otherwise, we can go to the next topic. You don't have to have comments on every topic. There's not a prize for that.
No.
But yes, please.
I do always have questions, but yeah. So the footprint right now is, and I don't know if it fits what you mean by footprint, but it's right now a U shape. And the building across the street from it on the Clarendon Boulevard side is also U shaped. So I was wondering if aesthetically that kind of makes sense, because it kind of like you're having 2 U's right across from each other. And it might just, you had the pictures of the areas around it, but you didn't have that residential building, which kind of mirrors what you're doing on the other side. So it's kind of, so that's my first question.
Do you mind repeating what the question was versus?
So the U shape.
I understand your
How
comment,
is it? How is it from an architectural standpoint?
So here's an image on the screen of that Cortland Park Apartments, I think.
Yeah,
What you're talking about.
I'm sure that Ashton and Dan will have a couple of thoughts here, but a lot of this too is based on what we heard in the GLUP study process and what's in the sector plan addendum, and particularly the need for open space on that south side. And I'm sure that folks who know a lot more about architecture than I do will be able to tell you why that makes sense with it. But that is a large part of the reason why the building is pushed toward the north part of the site, and then that U is kind of part of it there. I'm sure you'll have better.
Yeah, this is a picture of the building.
Yes. Yeah, I think Ted hit on the first one. It's open space. The second thing that comes to mind for me is just the southern exposure. So we had just talked about the level 2 amenity courtyard for those residents. Having southern exposure both for the open space as well as that amenity courtyard to us was a priority. And then the other aspect is really just our ability to comply with both the GLUB study and other guidance for tapering. And so we wanted to concentrate density in the middle of the block, and we felt like the U shape was the best way to do that.
Is there any way to use that upper level to make it also a public space with you? Right now, it could have been retail all the way around, right? But right now we have this floor that's kind of closed. Potentially, it could be an additional public space because big open public space.
Mm-hmm.
That's another opportunity.
I think one of the challenges with that, and that's a question that comes up all the time, are operational and security, right? The difficulty of letting folks in the building and moving it around. The county also has pretty strict guidelines when an easement is conveyed, there are very specific qualifications and conditions that have to be met, and it's difficult to impossible to do that on top of that portion of a building.
So I'll go to Commissioner Peters in a moment. I do think that we're, and I'm fine with this. I think as we're talking land use and density, we're also kind of, very much talking site design and, as that kind of goes into building form. So if folks kind of want to open up to sort of any of the agenda topics for tonight, I'm open to that. I recognize that the topics for tonight all sort of bleed into each other. So I'm not going to be too much of a stickler. Commissioner Peterson.
So I wanted to say for land use, I think it makes sense to have mixed use, retail and residential here. Density, I think, being so close to the courthouse metro as well as Clarendon, that makes sense to me. I live a couple blocks south of here in a building that's on a lot of these slides, and it's 13 stories and probably 14 in some areas. It's on a hill. So I'm comfortable with the density. I would like to see more sculpting of the building and more tapering. But so we'll transition.
Yes.
Comment, right? My first time,
No.
land use and density. So I know the applicant here, like you were talking about how you were kind of limited by the zoning in terms of kind of like being able to maximize that density. And I do feel like, I live very close to this area, I walk past every day. And I feel like that density, I really do think that it is quite required and there's a lot of demand. And I wonder if like you are being limited by, like if you considered, for example, applying, or if that is a possibility, applying for like a higher density zoning code.
So I'll address that. Thank you for your question. But yes, that CO district that Dan referenced in some of the earlier slides, that's what, when we initially did the GLUP study several years ago, that's what we applied for. And one of the big reasons that we thought the CO would be more appropriate at that time than the CO 2.5, which we ultimately have ended up with the potential recommendation for, is that is an FAR-based zone, a floor area ratio-based zone. So your density is constrained by your overall floor area in the CO. In the CO 2.5, which we have, it is on a unit-based zone. So you're allowed X number of units per acre. So that, creates some different types of incentives, right? It incentivizes larger units because the unit that's 300 square feet or 3,000 square feet counts the same for your density. There are opportunities for bonus density where we've been able to address some of that, but certainly that's a constraint. The height, again, we started with 16 based on some of the comments that we heard. We moved it down to the 14, but that's another governor, obviously, on the amount of density that can be provided. So we're certainly doing the as much as we're able within the envelope that we've been provided. And it does also go to that tapering question, right? Because the more the building is tapered, the more we start carving back pieces, the more difficult it is to lay out units. So it all kind of comes together and doing the best we can with what we have.
I'll go to you in a second. I'm going to ask a question. And apologies if I just didn't pick up on this before. What is the breakout of unit sizing that you're?
The base density for CO 2.5.
Well,
No. What is the makeup of units?
What's the 3 1s 2?
3 1. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There's slide 4.
Yeah, there's.
Yeah, we.
Sorry.
There's a slide on this.
I have it.
A lot of reading.
Sorry.
No, it's not. I was clearly there. It was a lot to read.
We can go into any specifics here, but
No, I just wanted to kind of have a sense.
the one thing I'll highlight is that we do have more 2-bedroom plus den and 3-bedroom units than your typical apartment building.
Okay.
And part of that is driven by the unit per acre zoning constraint. And part of it's driven by our market research into demand for larger units in this location. Definitely don't have to dwell on housing crisis and lack of housing affordability, but people are renting for longer, whether it's young families, couples, you name it. And so we think that this is a great opportunity to accommodate that need.
So what is a junior 1-bedroom?
Junior 1-bedroom is like a 1-bedroom, but the bedroom is typically not located against the window wall. So it's interior to the unit.
Okay.
So it's not.
But it is a separate, it has a door. It's
Yes.
not, okay,
Exactly.
right. So it is
It's
substitute.
not like a studio or an.
Okay.
efficiency
Okay.
unit.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Tommy.
Yeah, I think the land use and density is fine here. I'm sorry, we don't have as many units as originally proposed, can use the housing, but that's okay. I'd like to see renderings the next time on how the Wilson Boulevard residential units that open up on the street, how they look, how they're going to interact with that sidewalk there. I think it's great to have them, so don't get me wrong, I'm really happy that you put them in. I just want to see how they interact with the sidewalk. Because are they going to be, set back a little bit? Is there going to be some, how high up are the windows, that sort of thing? Because some design matters for that sort of thing.
Do you mind
Material,
if I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Scott, would you be able to share the elevation that we included? It might not be as polished as the rendering, but I think it is useful to look at for the ground floor residential units along Wilson Boulevard. And if you can zoom in just a little, that would be great. So one thing that we are we need to be cognizant of as we look at the Wilson Boulevard frontage is a little bit of topography change. So some of these units will have small stoops, but otherwise we're trying to keep them very close to the sidewalk so that it maintains that same level of activation that you might otherwise
Right,
see.
I don't have a problem with it. I just want for privacy purposes, because otherwise there are some Clarendon units that open right out on the sidewalk, and they're really good to have, but because the windows are so big and they're so close, people always keep them shades completely drawn, which sort of defeats the purpose of having eyes on the street because nobody can see through.
Sure.
If there's sort of something that would give people inside more of a feel of privacy, rather than having a window go straight down to the ground, to the floor, that could help them want to leave it a bit more open rather than just always have blinds drawn completely.
Sure.
That's my point on that. The materials variation, I actually agree with you that you don't want too many material variations. There are so many different setbacks and different design here that if you start adding in more material variation, it almost becomes visually noisy. I think it's a pretty sophisticated design that I don't think it needs to have that material variation in order to have it look differently, because there are a number of, ins and outs. I like the sort of pavilion look, on both corners. That really breaks up the building also. So I'm happy with not having a lot of different materials on this building. That's my aesthetic choice on it. Basically, and we will talk about the public art of the next one, because that is something I'm interested in. I think, and I also would want to flag how the trees are going to be done on that site on Clarendon, because I want to be careful that as someone is driving along or walking along going east on Clarendon, that they can actually see the retail there, that it's not completely shielded, because I want that retail to be very successful. So that means to be successful has to be seen. And, while I do want that space to be biophilic, I also want it to be the way that people can see it as they're going by and know that there's something there that's worth stopping at. I agree with the Barton being the entry and that Cleveland being the service street, which is why I'm really not concerned about it being a slab going straight up and down, because Cleveland is really is the service street. It's not going to be a pedestrian street. It dead ends at Wilson. It's not a highly trafficked one. Barton is highly trafficked. The bus line goes along it. It's a busy street, and it should be a busy street. And that's why it's really good to have the lobby there, because that makes it even busier. I like that. Cleveland can be the service street. So having that be a slab, I'm not as concerned about having setbacks there that visually are concerned for pedestrians. So that's just my look at it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
So from the, I too wanted, first of all, I really wanted, and we really want a viable building that is successful. What makes a pedestrian area and retail successful is having things humans. So it was concerning to me when you raised it from 2 stories to 4 stories, because the feel of being in that area now suddenly is much taller, and it's a very different feel than if it was more human scale, which I think is what leads to the success of Clarendon Crossings, for example, is because it's very human scale. And so I would like to see that more along the plaza area on the and that's something to think about. Also, contrary to Commissioner Latlami, I'm concerned about creating a wind tunnel on Cleveland Street. With like the two and with Courthouse West ending up the same and creating that wind tunnel effect. And I think that braking helped stop the wind. That's a concern there. The other thing is right now, yeah, it looks, and the other thing about the tapering, it really helps with preventing that bulb. It's between, ultimately, it's between two residential areas. And it's at the same time part of the spine to two very busy areas. Which brings me to my next thing, which is even though retail on side streets may not have been popular and it was hard to find tenants for them, these are not on side streets. This is Wilson Boulevard and Clarendon Boulevard. This is where people walk. And having retail actually on Wilson as well as, or public space on Wilson as well as the Clarendon side, I think would be successful. One thing that I brought to your attention during the LRPC, which is something that our area desperately needs along the Orange Corridor, and this is like the center of the Orange Corridor, is a community center. And I was wondering if you would consider or think about that instead of having those lofts there, that we actually have a community center there. I don't know if you started discussing with the county about the benefits package, for housing and all on and so forth, but this is something that I think would be a perfect location for it because people from Roslyn, people from Boston, and all along would be able to come to that. It would activate that building. It would make that retail more successful. It would provide a community space for the community. I really encourage you to consider. And I think that loft area.
Community benefits are on the agenda for next time. I think that's good feedback, for the team the applicant to have, in the context of that, but I'm not expecting a response on community benefits tonight.
No, but I want them to hear.
No, that's fine. I just, like I said, it's good feedback to have there.
To consider it.
I saw actually the gentleman next to Commissioner, you had your hand raised.
I did, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I think this is about site design and layout. The existing building has quite a few fairly mature trees around it. I don't know whether they all would be called street trees or some of them are too far in to be called street trees. But I know that I'm not looking at this as a landscape issue, but as a design and construction issue, whether some of the benefit of the existing trees could be preserved in a few places along the two major corridors, particularly the Clarendon corridor, which would give you a head start on the open space. And I think to Jim's point about it's the younger trees that block the first 8 feet, the retail. But if you have a mature tree, you can trim up a little. You've got shade and you've got some overhanging canopy. You still have all the visibility underneath. So I don't know if it's possible to do it, but if you could look into that. That's an area where right along there where you're not actually going to be building because it's the trapezoid of open space. So there might be possibility. The trick I think would be the staging of the construction process itself. But it would be, to me, it would be worth a try. And as far as the structure of the building, this is a separate point. You mentioned having a pool on. So structurally, I think you can handle anything on the roof. And what I would recommend, because of you mentioned a fairly mixed demography here, in some of that space, if you could put raised beds for community gardens for people to have allotments, grow their own vegetables, or at least teach their kids how to grow vegetables, that kind of thing. And again, I put that under the category of the building structure, because if you don't prep that ahead of time, you don't get to do it. So, there's
Sure.
other things.
Thanks for that feedback. We haven't studied the mature trees, but it's something that we can look into, and I know that community gardens have been successful at other buildings in
So-
Arlington.
I'm sure
I
that
would approach that goes to a construction issue in terms of and space, so in terms of preservation, and both those and for next time. Although I think that was a creative way that you put those in under building design. Yes, sir.
I like the idea of trying to activate the street level along Wilson Boulevard. I'm not sure that apartments work there well. I mean, there are things that you can put there. One is the exercise facility for the, and that gives you a way to look into. Presumably, it's open. A lot of them are in the different apartment buildings. So there is some activation of the street there. Another thing would be some restaurants or other retail. Another possibility of the provide less view into the space could be doctor's offices, dentist's offices. Maybe they can even go on the second floor of the building.
Community.
Would work also. I assume that's going to be, your pickleball court or something like that, and they're fairly small. But there are better ways of doing Wilson. And the retail would be better there in all likelihood than on the Clarendon Boulevard side, because it would be so far back from the street. You look at the building that they're actually going to tear down, that's up in the center of Clarendon, 3033 Clarendon Boulevard. It's always had retail, but not very exciting retail, because it's behind the plaza area, which has a parking garage underneath it. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think of how you fit this into the community a little better.
So I thought Commissioner then Tommy and then Commissioner Peterson.
Yeah, and this is more for staff. Has there been any further proposals for the block across the street, across Cleveland, between Whole Foods and this site?
Courthouse West block?
Yeah.
Not that I know of at this point.
Because that, if there was something there, we should probably know what that proposal would be, or what the thought is, because these are going to be facing each other, and how would they interact?
So other than the Courthouse West Special Glove Study, which I referenced a few times in my presentation, some of that guidance, that's applicable for this site is also obviously applicable there. So same sort of development could go in there, but we don't have any active applications at this point.
It just never went anywhere.
At this point, I don't have any further information.
I don't know whether they're fully.
It's good to know.
They're fully consolidated the site either, although I thought the
they had.
out parcel was a willing seller at some point in time.
Still not consolidated.
Commissioner Peterson.
So I wanted to agree with Dina about seeing more sculpting on the Cleveland Street side to look at the wind tunnel, and also just, getting a more attractive building overall. Also, like David, I would love to see green uses on the building. So looking at rooftop by the pool, or even that green terrace that was along Wilson Boulevard. I don't think it makes sense to be like an active social space, because the noise would carry over into the neighborhood. But if there was rooftop gardens up there, I think that would be a really nice way to have a green roof and some extra. And then kind of following with what Bill was saying, I'm interested in the retail space and what you're envisioning for it. And I know there's a daycare in the building right now, which is really important to the community. And if that would be an appropriate use for any of the space, or even as a possible alternative to the residential along Wilson.
Sure. We have started to communicate with the daycare tenant. We know throughout the community engagement process, it's clearly a priority for everyone, and it's a priority of ours to figure out a solution that works. So what we've tried to do from a design standpoint is not preclude them from being able to come back into the new development. We've also started to take some steps to try to locate spaces within Arlington where they could either temporarily move during construction or permanently move so that their operations aren't impacted whatsoever by our development. So Emma did reference some of the carve outs that we made in the open space. We've labeled them as outdoor dining because we think that they could accommodate uses such as outdoor dining. We didn't want to double count that space as open space. But one possibility besides outdoor dining could be the outdoor space that's required for a daycare.
I'd just add to that, Dan, we've also been in touch proactively with AED about helping make sure that the daycare finds a home, whether that's here or somewhere nearby.
So following along on that, I know that we mentioned this in kind of our prep call for that, but I appreciate that you're having the ongoing communications with the daycare provider. Very, as a user of daycare services, I know it's very important that those communications be happening early and often so that they can make sure that parents and, teachers and everyone, involved in using the school is very, informed, making determinations, and that we're not, in the middle of a preschool year, whatever that, trajectory is, and folks are scrambling. So I appreciate you taking that, I encourage you to continue to be proactive in that communication, but that is something that we had spoken on. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to get back to those street level units. I was wondering, I might have missed this. Do we know about how many and which types of to be on that street level?
I think we have 5, if not 6 total along Wilson Boulevard. Yeah, and they'll be 1-bedroom type units. We initially studied whether or not they could be loft style units. We probably won't have the height, to be honest, to be able to do that, but they'll be 1-bedroom units.
Yes.
All right, so just a sort of general comment. So I think in terms of the floors, I feel like I'm a little disappointed that we kind of went down. I can understand that was some of the feedback that we got, but I think I feel like let's not go any further down. If anything, other direction. I think in terms of the step backs, I kind of disagree with some of the feedback around the Cleveland side. I think we're good there, especially knowing that area. It sort of is a T-junction, preventing sort of wind tunnel aspect there because of the end, and then the downhill when you go down Cleveland past south of Clarendon. I think any additional floors, more housing, more units, of course. Second, agree with some of the commentary and my point of view around the on the Cleveland and Wilson side, adding retail there. I think it could really kind of liven up that area. There's already kind of retail on the north side of Wilson. Also, I think that coupled with, I think this is mostly site design, partially touches in some other areas, but I wonder if there's an opportunity to use some of the space, let's say the northbound lane of Cleveland, to open up the extend the open space up to there, and that would essentially connect up the retail through that open space, but still leave enough space for the garage and the loading bay. Furthermore, it would, and this is where it kind of possibly touches into other areas. Like I said, I passed by this area a lot. The past 2 years, I've seen a lot of crashes on that northbound lane in Cleveland. Even 8 days ago, I saw the aftermath of one. So I think it would also address some of those transportation issues, which we can cover next meeting. But I feel like that open space then would become a little bit bigger, and it's not just this, and then you also solve for some of the setback issues and also wider sidewalks and things like that we're talking about because the road is essentially moved forward.
Thank you for that feedback. I guess I'll echo your first point. I think we're sensitive to carving and sculpting the building on the Cleveland side, partially because we've proactively sculpted the building on the other 3 frontages, which we view to be more impactful. But also because we reduced the height from 16 stories to 14 stories, eroding any more rentable square footage will impact the viability of the project.
Any other comments from the SPRC? Do we have any? Oh, yes, sir.
If you're going to have a pool on the roof, you need to have a site plan condition that prevents people from having amplified sound up there, including music, because it's going to flow into all the other apartment buildings and into the neighborhoods. So that's It should be a site plan.
We'll look into it, but outdoor noise is regulated. There's a noise ordinance, so they would never be able to.
And there are
violate
certainly hours associated with that as well, in terms of.
Well, just general prohibition. Because I'm not sure people people in some of the apartment buildings particularly in Clarendon Courthouse have had problems with just bar noise. You know, they've got stuff on the roofs of a 2-story building. Something up on a 10, 12-story building, you know, at that height is going to go well into the neighborhoods and other apartment buildings. So I think it's something you want to do.
We will. Any other feedback from SPRC membership? We have anyone signed up for public comment?
Are we doing all the?
Well, I'd opened it up and we were doing all.
I didn't realize that.
I'm sorry.
Okay, well, I wanted to.
No, wait, what? Parking and loading is next week. Those were
Oh,
those were the topics that were covered
I think you
in
might be
the
looking.
online engagement. It's
Sorry.
down. So the second part that says March
Oh,
10th,
right.
those are the topics we did: land use density, site plan and layout, building height, building form and architecture. And since all of those sort of bleed into each other, as I realized those comments, we sort of did this once. Do anything else on those items? The loading and parking.
I had a loading.
Fine. Okay, yeah, that's on the agenda for transportation for next week. Yes.
I'll just say briefly, I don't feel like there's a lot of distinction between the top and the middle. I don't, you know, I might agree with Commissioner Lantelmi that changes in the materials wouldn't be recommended, but I do feel like I see definitely a base and I definitely see a middle/top, like the middle and the top kind of blend together for.
Yes.
Also building form and architecture, I think it's much better, especially with a building this size, to have the facade be variations on a theme, which is what you're trying to do, I think, as opposed to multiple contrasting patterns and textures. And so there are, of course, a lot of ways to do that, but I think that it's pretty close to working just in this rendering here. But I do want to add one thing, and if this looks like sneaking another thing from the second meeting into the first one, I'll own that. But fenestration, if you don't think about bird-friendly glass as part of architecture, you're never going to get there. But with all of the vegetation on all levels, really need to think about that. It is not nearly the cost difference with regular glass, especially in saving glass, as it used to be even 5 years ago. And it is well worth it for a number of reasons. And you can get it as the same kind of functionality that can help with energy conservation, but also knock down the reflection. And with everything you have in mind as far as the public space, the last thing you want are 1,000 carcasses sitting there during the spring migration. So please really consider that and look around there. Manufacturers are going crazy over this stuff now because it is now becoming statutory in many cities. New York is mandatory 0 to 100. And that's what's in the current draft of the Arlington GVIP. So
I'll let Ashton correct me if I'm wrong, but we have planned to incorporate bird-friendly glass from, I think, 8 feet to 36 feet in height.
yeah,
At the minimum.
That's not going to get it. You need to go around up to about 4 floors because that's the level at which you have all of the vegetation, and then 2 floors above any terraces that have vegetation. Because the first thing the birds do when they're feeding on trees is turn around and see open sky, and it's actually a reflection. They don't know. So understood. Yeah, and frankly, if there's any impact on retail, having it at 0 to 8, as was erroneously left out because of the retail plan. But if there's any problem in terms of 0 to 8. It's actually the lost opportunity of keeping people from walking into plate glass. So it doesn't take much. Look at the aquatic center. Tiny thread every 4 inches. It's almost not visible. And there's dozens of other technologies that don't involve actual objects in the plasma. So look into it. It's worth it.
So I will also reiterate that as far as the materialities of materials used on the site, sort of that design, I'm supportive of the design as far as kind of looks at this design, my own kind of personal response or reaction to the design. I do think that as you increase the number of materials, there can take on a busyness of larger projects that I don't personally find pleasant. Personal preference, I guess. I thought I saw hands. Yes.
Yeah, one thing I did want to mention is relatively young building what we have now. We're gonna have a new carbon footprint. Right now, we're in times where it may change demand of things and types of buildings. We really don't want to end up with a white elephant that's over an empty building that's very hard to market to what the market conditions are. I'm saying, but there's potentially changing market conditions right now. So it's kind of like we're at a juncture right now. So we don't know what to expect, right? So we don't want to end up with something that is another empty office building or empty residential building, what have you. And it's a big carbon footprint that we're taking down a relatively young building that was only built in the 80s and really hasn't met its useful life. And in addition to that, there have been quite a few studies recently which showed that other parts of Arlington are significantly cooler in the summer than that courthouse area. And so if there's any materials, and I'm not a specialist in this, but there are any materials to be used in the construction, whether it's the type of brick or what have you, that can have a more cooling effect, as you know, for that area, we would really appreciate that, because with extra heat, we have more heart attacks and shorter lifespans and effects on kids and et cetera, and the list goes on. So in addition to biophilia, which is very important, and paying attention to birds, but it's also important to focus also on human health and how we can get that to be, we understand we need the housing, but we also want to have healthy lives. And so what materials can be used to kind of.
Sure, thank you.
I think we're going to move to public comment. Do we have anyone in the room for public comment?
Yes, yeah, 2 people first up.
So we'll do in the room and then virtual?
Yes.
Okay.
That's how.
Okay. You tell me when we're ready and go to the first person.
All right.
Ready? We're waiting another second.
Okay.
We're gonna share the screen and you'll have a clock so that you'll be able to
Not
see.
gonna take the 2
It's just our process.
You're good. You're good.
Now we're ready for you? Yes, now we're ready for you.
I'm Chad Berwick. I'm just a Clarendon Courthouse resident. Just wanted to come out and express my support for this project. I just know that many commissioners, county board members like to hear support for projects because a lot of it's in opposition. I would have been happy with this at 16 stories. I understand that the courthouse study is kind of the reason why that. So I think in the future, when we're doing these studies, maybe think a little bit more about maximum story limits in those, because it can affect future projects. Support DEMA's idea for our communities, thing that we really don't have in this area. So I know this isn't the community benefits part, but public comments, so I don't have to stick to it. So think about it. We really don't have one. And, I just think this area, which is so young, there's so many people, we have all these expensive gyms. It would be great to have something in Arlington that, is just for everybody. So I think that's really cool. The residential units on Wilson, I think there should maybe be reconsidered. I don't know if they really make sense. I think I live pretty much anywhere, but along just the frontage on Wilson Boulevard. That's just a first. Yeah, generally supportive. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Can I ask questions to the questions or comments?
Yes, well, we can't get into a back and forth.
My question is just related to the community center. Are there specific uses that you wish existed?
I think just general use community center, right? Like I'm thinking of the one that they have, like Arlington Mill area. I feel like that's like the closest one that I even know. Just general use.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, I haven't thought of something specific, gym equipment, whatever.
Okay.
Stuff like
Places
that.
for.
This time is your time. It's 2 minutes total. Oh,
I'm literally letting it go down. I had to start the clock again.
I'll talk.
Okay. Next speaker.
Thomas McCarthy.
Hi, it's my first time at one of these, so I'm not very familiar what the format was like, but it was very informative, so thank you, everybody. Came here to voice my support for the project, and really when I think of what I value for a project like this, two key things. One is additional housing in Arlington. Prices for rent, like my apartment complex, have gone up significantly in the last couple of years, so the more housing stock we had, I think is a good thing on the whole, and on the net. The second is additional public space. So really in the Arlington area, one of the only green spaces we have is Rocky Run Park. It's a walking distance from my apartment complex, and I appreciate having a place where I can go out and eat a sandwich or spend an afternoon reading if I so choose. But really outside of that space, there's not a lot of opportunity to have kind of those public seated areas. So I think having an outdoor venue, or not venue, but small space there is good for the community as a whole and can offer as a gathering spot that really doesn't exist outside of Courthouse Plaza and Rocky Run Park. And then the last thing I would say is just additional retail space I think is valuable. The restaurant space within Courthouse is really limited to just Courthouse Plaza and then largely downtown Clarendon for a couple local restaurants. So building up that scene and having more space for restaurants for a growing population, I think is a valuable use of space. So I'll cede the rest of my time.
Or if you have questions,
Just say.
25 questions, 25 seconds asking questions.
No questions. Thank
No
you.
questions. There you go. Thank you.
Next
next
we have, Karen Surface.
And that is virtual, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. I'm a member of the Housing Commission. I'm sorry I couldn't join you guys in person, but thank you very much for allowing me to make a comment. I really support this project. We are always looking for projects that have 3 bedrooms. So that's really, I hope that you're able to keep the mix of 3 bedrooms, the 29 units that are 3 bedrooms, and also the 43 units that are 2 bedrooms and den, because this county severely lacks larger units. So we are, as a member of the Housing Commission, I support it, and I hope you're able to keep that in the mix. Thanks.
Again, any questions to that? You have a minute and 20 seconds. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Is that the last speaker?
That was the last speaker.
Okay. Well then, I pride myself on running an efficient meeting and you all get 33 minutes back. So great. Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
do this
Thank you.
at a date to be finalized, right?
It's established a new process now. It's
Most likely April
It's not just community commerce. It's community.
April 17th.
As a.
Most likely, but we'll send out. Don't like tattoo that date.
Activities.
Yeah. This is an important date for a different reason.
That would be a very.
Not for this reason.
So Arlington.
That's why I wanted.
Oh, have a merit.
Yeah.
Well, let's see you.
Yeah. The next one probably.